When you're writing an essay, especially for college entrance, for the ACT, for classes, or your work, or in high school, grade school, or college, English 101, English 102, the big thing that you want to worry about is the structure of what you're doing. But you should also pay attention to the content of what you are putting into the essay. Because you really want to convince someone of your reasoning, but you want to sound rational. You don't want to sound phony or unauthentic, which is one of the big things about essays is show, don't tell. That means to give examples of what you're talking about, and to use those examples in a way that's different than when you are in high school or grade school. Your high school and grade school teachers they're being paid to read what you wrote. Same thing with college, but once you get to like a research paper or a thesis, at a certain point you have to convince people who are not being paid to give you pointers or anything like that. So it can be harsh to deal with it, and you have to use the correct logical approach. So things have to be deductive. You don't want it to be purely emotional appeal. You want it to be you want it to make sense to whoever your audience is, and that's really the thing, is it's the consumer, it's not you. It's not about what you want, it's about it is, but it's about the consumer. And that's the thing, is you have to make what you want appealing to someone else in your audience. And so one of the big things is you have to identify your audience. The essay, the structure that I usually go with, and you can Ralph Waldo Emerson, T.S. Eliot, and libertarian, I'm trying to think of his name, wrote on Walden Pond, but I forgot, Henry David Thoreau. So those are some of the authors that you can read if you really want to learn about essay writing at its essence, or if you want to do it for a career. The essays that you write, they have a certain structure that's basic to any essay, and that is that you have the main point in an intro paragraph. That intro paragraph with the main point, it needs to have whatever it is that you're arguing in the last sentence of your intro paragraph. And your intro paragraph should be a story that is genuine and authentic and relates personally to your viewers as well as you, that is a real life experience. And that should be the first paragraph that you write. And usually what you want to do is you want to make the first line kind of like a hook. So you want to grab people's attention. So that's why you want to use things like buzzwords, which are, or search engine optimization type terms. Words that, and you want to use a sentence that uses you want to ask a deep, meaningful question. And anything that you argue, you have to think about how you want to sequentially do that, so that people are ingrained in the process of your writing, or in the process of reading what you have written. But you should never forsake your audience when you are writing an essay. The second paragraph is usually going to start out with a subtopic that relates within the umbrella of the first paragraphs, the question you're asking. The second follows with another main point, and then the third. And so then you want to write the rebuttal for this essay. And the rebuttal is usually to think about what would be the reasons that someone would be dissuaded from my idea, and how can I address that. And that can be a real difficult thing if you don't really, but one of the best ways to do that I find is to ask people questions, maybe survey friends, family, as to why would they have a problem with your argument. And this thing is, or why would they disagree with your argument is maybe better, but you want to allow for some dialogue to kind of understand where the general purpose is coming from. I would, or the general rebuttal is, genuine rebuttal is coming from. And it's going to come from whoever your audience is. In a class, that's your teacher, but if you're writing essays professionally, it's more so gonna be, let's say you're writing a science essay, it's gonna be people who are in that field, and they tend to know when they're reading something that's hokey or terrible or whatever. But the rebuttal should cover all of that. And then the last paragraph is the conclusion. And you always want to end with a sense of intrigue, but you want the last part of the conclusion to summarize everything that you've written and reiterate your main point in the first paragraph, your question, and you want it answered. And so the one of the best ways to start out an essay is to use a quote from another, from somebody who is knowledgeable about the subject. And so beginning with a quote, you should always cite your sources. You want to use at least 2 or 3 sources, I believe it is, when writing the essay. And it should be 2-3 pages, but not really any longer. Unless you're required to, or you're doing some kind of research or something through like a thought experiment. And you can write essays for fun, and they're actually good to come back to at some point later in time, because as your circumstances change and your life changes, you may be able to glean some meaning from things that you wrote previously. So those essays, going back as far as science fair, if you have a science fair project that you're working on, maybe that idea, science fair is over, maybe save the essay or the proof or whatever you're trying to do your experiment on. And it's funny, I was thinking the other day that one of the things I would really like to have is the essay that I wrote, or the paper I wrote for my science fair, because it was actually a paper that I wrote on, I think it was Mars travel, and it had something to do with cryogenics. And now I could write it, but I don't remember what the topic was. And the problem with that is it was on like cryogenics or something. And it was talking about plants sending information and taking information and all that. And it really wasn't that ludicrous of an idea, but it was cutting edge as far as at the time what I wrote. But I never I didn't have the money or the resources to do the experiment that I was explaining. And that's one of the things that can be hard is when you have limited resources as a kid in science fair. But when you're writing an essay, you always want to use a database like JSTOR or something like that. And so your college or maybe your high school should have access to some of that stuff. But writing an essay can be a very grueling process unless you're arguing something that you want to argue. One of the things that I like to do in debate or in discussion is as far as argumentation and reasoning and rhetoric, is I like to take the underdog position or play devil's advocate. And when you play devil's advocate, you are essentially arguing the point that you don't believe in. And you're doing that for a very specific purpose. Because you want to gauge your audience's reaction, whoever it is that's reading your stuff. And I find it easier to argue the point that I find less valuable to see if it has any true merit versus arguing the easy side of things. And so it's sometimes better to be an advocate for the difficult position just for the point of writing the rebuttal. And like I said, you want to cover all your bases when you're writing the rebuttal because you don't want someone to come in edgewise and say something and then your entire point is moot. So that's how I would normally do it. There are other structures to essays, and you're not always trying to convince someone about something when you write an essay. One of the things you get into when you're older is that essays are largely about ambiguous relationships and between topics, and it's not always going to be clear what the main point is, but you have to find the solution to that, and you have to separate all the redundant information, and you really want to be as straightforward as possible when you're writing an essay, but also you want to have some ambiguity in it for a time or some conflict in order to create intrigue. And it's just like you would with any written paper. But that's generally how I would look at an essay, not necessarily how other people do or other people would, but I like writing essays. I haven't read one in a while. But I haven't really written a big essay or anything in a very long time. But as an adult, they can be stress relieving. And it's also when you're an activist or and like you want to send an idea to your governor or your representative or your senator, one of the best ways to do that is to write an essay and explain that idea. Because phone conversations can be good, but sometimes ideas can be difficult to get across. And so a good way is to do that through email. Yeah.